This is the Roller Coaster Podcast, and I'm your host, Lucy Q. Life is a wild ride. It has twists and turns. It's scary, exciting, and downright fun. So throw your head back, arms in the air, and come along with me for the ride.
Life is like a roller coaster, baby, baby. I wanna ride.
Martha Tettenborn knew she wanted to be in a profession where she could help people and pursued a career in nutrition. She lived her life built on the foundations of nutrition, movement, and spirit. But in 2018, Martha was sidelined with a cancer diagnosis. Suddenly, she realized that she was no longer perfectly healthy. Martha is joining me today to share what she learned and how she helps other people with their cancer journey. Hi, Martha.
Hi, Lucy.
So that's a pretty startling diagnosis to receive, if you're so focused on nutrition and then all of a sudden to be hit with this cancer diagnosis. What happened in those moments and how did that lead you on this journey?
Oh, it happened entirely out of the blue. I was 58 years old and in what I thought was stellar health. I mean, I've always fought with the same 20 or 30 pounds, in terms of being cosmetically ideal. But, I had lots of energy. I was working, I was volunteering, I was doing all the things I love. Life was grand, nothing hurt. I took no medications. I was busy, great. It was the middle of summer, and a girlfriend sent me a text message and said, "So, what are you up to on your plank?" Because she was exercising, training, and she was aiming for a 2-minute plank, which is a long time to hold a plank. That's that exercise where you're kind of horizontal off the ground on your elbows and your toes.
Yeah.
And I kind of said, "Ooh, I haven't done one of those in a little while." I'd kind of slipped up. So I literally got off the sofa and laid down on my living room floor. And the moment I laid down on my belly, which isn't a place I normally am ever in my life, there was something there. There was a bump there. It was like I was laying on an egg or something. It was very strange. And I mean, I immediately knew that there was something wrong. And I'm not one to shy away from that or kind of pretend it didn't happen. So I literally sat up off my living room floor and grabbed the phone and called my doctor and said, "There's something in my lower abdomen and I don't know what it is and I need to come see you." And so 5 days later, I got in to see her. And of course, by then I had done the whole Dr. Google thing and I figured out that I probably had a uterine fibroid and, I would probably have to have it removed. But I went in to see the doc and she did a bunch of poking and prodding and making sort of unhappy noises and sent me off for an ultrasound. And it turned out to be about a 15 to 16 centimeter ovarian cyst. Big, simple, fluid-filled cyst. Had a bit of blood work and it didn't show any of the anything significant in terms of cancer markers or anything. So nobody thought it was cancer. Took about 2 months before I finally had it laparoscopically ruptured and removed, which was my choice because nobody thought it was cancer. And 6 days later, they called me back and said, "The surgeon wants to see you. Come tomorrow morning, bring your husband."
Oh, that's never good.
No, exactly. I mean, I work in healthcare, right? Like I'm not going to sugarcoat that. I just, it was all of a sudden out of the blue. So, my husband came in the house from wherever he'd been at. And, the moment I saw him, I said, "This is what's happened." And the two of us sort of sat and stared at each other like a couple of deer in the headlights for a while. But then we're both very pragmatic people. And we just kind of said, "Okay, well, let's see what they say tomorrow." And that's how I started down the path of finding out that I had ovarian cancer. Now, it was stage 1. So it was considered to be self-contained, like within the cyst, but because the cyst was so big, it had kept growing all summer in that 2 months. So, I mean, by the time it came out, there was 1.5 liters of fluid that came out of that cyst.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, it was literally riding above my navel. It felt like I was, 5 months pregnant. And every time I sat down, I had to pull my waistband up over the bump.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. You don't usually experience that when you're 58. But anyways, I had agreed to the laparoscopic surgery so that they had, the cyst had to be ruptured inside of me and the contents sort of sucked out. And then they just pull out this little deflated balloon sort of thing. But that's considered a spill in the world of cancer. So it was strongly recommended that I follow up with an oncology program and probably chemotherapy. So I ended up having a second surgery to have a full hysterectomy, which is the normal standard of care for ovarian cancer. And, they take a look around while they're in there. And then I was recommended 6 rounds of chemotherapy. And I was frankly terrified of the chemotherapy. Basically, I am extremely drug naive because I've led a healthy life and not required really any medication or anything. And chemotherapy is poison. It's scary stuff. And the thought of willingly subjecting myself to that poison was really hard for me. And I also had to come to terms with the fact that I was no longer this smugly perfect, human specimen / dietitian. Like, I had a private practice teaching low carb diets for healthy aging and, living awesome and all that stuff. And so my identity felt like it was being redefined by having this cancer. So there was mental stuff that I had to sort of process, as well as the fear of the physical stuff like surgery and pain and chemotherapy.
So how did your knowledge of nutrition, how did that come to heads with what the doctors were telling you? Because I've heard in different circumstances that doctors maybe receive 1 hour of nutrition throughout all of their training. So, I've heard of friends and friends' family when they've had this cancer diagnosis, that they're, as you said, they're going to the chemotherapy, they're going to the surgeries, they're going to all of these very invasive procedures, and there's no mention of nutrition. So how did you tie that all together? And what did your doctor say about it?
Yeah, well, I didn't tell them first.
Okay. Probably a good idea.
Yeah. So, I mean, even in my schooling, we didn't learn, I went to university a lot of years ago, believe me, but I went to university when low carb nutrition was absolutely the worst possible thing. Like, in fact, it really wasn't even heard of. But the low fat paradigm, the low carbohydrate or low cholesterol, low fat paradigm for, everybody was really just cutting edge science when I was in university in the 80s. So that's how I had practiced for, 25 years. But we really didn't talk about cancer, and certainly not that there was any sort of metabolic aspect to cancer or a nutritional impact that we could have on cancer, with the exception of just trying to support people through the treatments, because the treatments were so awful. Chemotherapy making you so nauseous and all that sort of stuff. So all we really had to work with was the concept of helping people get enough nutrition that they didn't lose weight and fade away. And we also thought at one point, which I've since discovered isn't the truth, that the cachexia that goes with cancer, which is that awful muscle wasting where people become very skeletal, that's not strictly a calorie thing. That's not just about not getting enough to eat. That's an actual metabolic process. And so just getting more calories in doesn't actually make that better. And I can attest to that from my own, years of experience, that no matter what we tried to do in terms of getting the calories into people, We didn't generally succeed with cachexia. So there was no talk. No, nobody ever says to you, so what do you eat? When you get one of these diagnoses, or well, even when you go to see somebody about diabetes, the doctors won't actually talk to people about what they eat. But I had already shifted my perspective into a low carb, healthy fats, food first sort of approach to nutrition. And so that's the direction that I started looking in terms of doing some research. And what I discovered is that there's an entire field of science around the metabolism of cancer, and that it's different than healthy cells. And who knew? I've been a dietitian for over 30 years and I had no idea. It literally blew my mind.
Yeah, and I'll admit I'm lost in what you're saying, because when you say the metabolism of cancer, when I think of metabolism, I think of how my body works. So can you maybe explain a little bit more of what you mean by the metabolism of cancer?
Sure. Well, we treat cancer as a disease of damaged genetics. So the genes are damaged. They have mutations, and that's what causes the uncontrolled growth of cancer. That's kind of the theory that has been going around for the last 50 years. In a healthy cell, we burn energy in a little organelle, a little part of our cell called the mitochondria. And there's a chemical process that we go through to break down the fuel into the actual energy units that a cell uses, which is called ATP. We can burn sugar, we can burn fats, we can burn ketones. We have, we're pretty multifunctional as a species. And that's how our healthy cells make energy. But cancer cells, they discovered, generally have a damaged mitochondria, and they cannot make energy in the way that healthy cells do. So they use a much more ancient process called fermentation. And that takes place in the fluid of the cell, or the cytoplasm of the cell. It's a very fast way to make energy. We're capable of, our healthy cells are capable of it too, but we don't do it. Unless you're having an adrenaline rush, like that fight or flight, you got to run away from the saber-toothed tiger sort of energy, that you actually store sugar energy in your muscles for that particular situation. You're, running away from the saber-toothed tiger. And that's that process. Okay. So you can make an instant fuel supply. It's inefficient, but it's incredibly fast. And it's also not very clean burning. It creates waste products, which normal healthy cells don't create when they make energy. So the cancer can only use this fermentation process. And the fermentation process can really only use glucose, which is sugar, which is blood sugar. Okay. One of the hallmarks of cancer, one of the things that makes cancer different, is that it has no ability to turn itself off, to slow down, to downregulate itself, depending on what its fuel supply, like healthy cells do. So they're always hungry, and they always have to have sugar, and they always have to have insulin and the other growth factors that help them to get the sugar. And that's where you can use nutrition and how you fuel your body to actually have an effect on the cancer cells. Because if you can control the level of sugar in your blood and keep it low and not have spikes in your blood sugar, and keep the insulin levels that circulate in your body low, you are stressing those cancer cells, because they can't get what they need for their unregulated, no way to turn it off growth.
So is it that you're essentially starving the cancer cells because you're not giving it the sugars?
Yeah, starve is probably too strong a word, but you are stressing them. You're making it hard for them.
You're making it hard for them to reproduce at the rate that they were
that they would like to.
That they would like
Yes.
to. Okay.
Yeah, because
Okay.
you're not giving them what they need.
So how did that impact, like, how did that translate to what you were eating then? How did that impact your diet?
Well, actually, what I was already eating low carbohydrate because I had been following that lifestyle for several years. But what I discovered is that if I could put my body into what's called nutritional ketosis, meaning that my carbohydrate intake is so low that I have low circulating sugar. You can't have zero sugar, you would die. So, I mean, we're not talking zero sugar or zero insulin. That you don't survive that. But low, steady sugar supply by not putting carbohydrates in my diet, and encouraging my body to produce ketones, which is an alternate fuel that you are capable of making in your liver out of other body parts or other molecules. And the ketones are water soluble, and they kind of take the place of sugar when the carb intake is low. And so they supply muscle, they supply your brain. There's only a few places in your body that absolutely have to have glucose or blood sugar. And we have the ability to make that sugar ourselves in our liver. We don't have to eat actually any carbohydrate at all, and we're still fine. So by going on a ketogenic diet, I was able to keep my my fatty acids and the ketones in my blood up, which fueled everything that needed to be fueled, except the cancer cells, because I was keeping the sugar in my blood quite low. And so I went on a ketogenic diet for the entire time, quite a strict ketogenic diet for the entire time that I was actively in chemotherapy.
Now, when I hear low carb, when I hear ketogenic diet, the first thing that comes to my mind is Atkins Diet.
Yeah, he was one of the first people to really.
So is that the same thing that you're talking about? Because, you know, what I remember of the Atkins Diet, it was very heavily based on meat and then vegetables that they didn't consider to be carbs.
Right. The current interpretation of the Atkins diet tends to use a lot of processed products. You know, they get all kinds of lines of, you know, fake cookies and candies and breads and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. There's a lot of different ways to eat a ketogenic diet, because basically all ketogenic really means is that it is a diet or a way of eating that encourages your body to create ketones. That's what ketogenesis is creating ketones. So you can do it with an all meat diet or a meat and vegetable diet or a highly processed Atkins style diet or a vegetarian diet, even a vegan diet, though it's really, really hard. But the fastest way to get into ketosis is to eat nothing, like fasting.
Okay. and how does that work? Because
well,
I get really hangry if I don't eat. I can get vicious if I'm not eating. So how do you balance that with fasting?
Well, the reason that people get hangry, and I'm not speaking to you in particular, but
you can talk to me. I'll accept it 100%.
Is because the way that we eat in our society now is so heavily carbohydrate based that our bodies have basically forgotten how to process fatty acids, like how to process other alternate fuel sources, because we give ourselves carbohydrates for 3, 4, 5 times, maybe 6 times a day, right? Every meal contains a significant amount of carbs because we're very grain based, and a lot of sugar and that kind of stuff. And the way the body works is a very elegant system. If something's not being used, then we break it down and recycle those raw materials into something else. That's why muscles atrophy when you don't work out and that kind of thing. The same thing happens for your metabolic machinery. So the cellular process that will create energy from fatty acids is a series of chemical reactions. And if you're not ever letting yourself not have carbohydrates long enough to need an alternate fuel source, like the one that you're carrying around with your extra weight, right? Or well, even if you don't have extra weight, we all have lots of fat on our bodies. Then you only have carbohydrate burning metabolic pathways. So you are carb dependent basically. And so because of that, because you don't have any access to sort of what you have stored in your bank, which is the fat that you carry on your body, that's your backup fuel, right? But we are not able to access it because we are eating carbohydrates all the time. That pumps your blood insulin levels up, which shuts off any ability to take fat out of your fat stores. So people who are carb dependent really find that if they don't eat every few hours, they get hangry. They get that really low blood sugar kind of miserableness.
Nasty. I'll call it nasty.
Yeah,
Nasty, bitchy.
yeah.
I am just not good.
I used to do it too. I used to, I'd eat my oatmeal for breakfast or whatever, and I'd go to work, and by about 11 o'clock in the morning, I'm back downstairs, into the kitchen looking for some crackers or something. And if someone, boy, tries to get in my way between the time that I realize I need something to eat and I get downstairs and get either into my lunch bag or find some soda crackers or something, I was miserable. It was like, just get out of my way. Right. So, I mean, I was there, but I'll tell you, I haven't been there in probably 5 years. If I have to miss a meal, it's not a big deal. I now eat quite a high fat and moderate meat protein intake. I eat vegetables every day.
Do you count, because I know with Atkins some vegetables were carbs. Do you count those as carbs, or when you're talking about carbs, are you talking about breads and pastas and grains?
No, if it contains carbohydrates, then you should count it as carbs. Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, potatoes, sweet potatoes, beets, things like that will have carbs. But I can say that on a day-to-day basis, I don't count anything. I don't use regular bread hardly at all. I don't use rice or regular pasta. I have some alternatives for those things. I still love crackers. I'm a cracker and cheese person. Like that's been my comfort food my whole life. So I had to find some low carb alternatives to crackers, which I have found. And but I still, like, even now, other than vitamin D and the vitamin D K2 sort of combo in the winter, I don't take any supplements or anything. I'm strictly a food person. I
You get your
believe.
nutrition from your food. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's yeah, and I think that's a practice that we all need, and especially the vitamin D. Anybody, north of the equator, I've been told in multiple places that you are vitamin D deficient. So it's kind of a necessity for all of us.
Oh, and as Canadians,
Yeah.
I mean, I figure at least 8 months a year, we should be having a good vitamin D supplement pretty well every day.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, has there been any research in this type of diet and the prevention of cancer?
Not so much in prevention. I mean,
Is there evidence of that?
there is evidence to support eating a less processed whole foods. Like staying away from a lot of sugar and staying away from a lot of the processed seed oils. Those, if there's nothing else that people take away from this, cut out as much sugar as you can and cut out the processed seed oils.
What do you mean by processed seed oils?
That would be corn oil,
Okay.
soy oil, canola oil.
So sticking to the extra virgin olive oil and coconut oil and those types of things.
Avocado oil,
Avocado
butter, beef tallow. Yep. The ones that come from food in a form that nature has made as opposed to a factory. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you ever
So
want to be totally grossed out, go to YouTube and look up how canola oil is made or how
No.
corn oil is made and watch the like the
Oh,
actual manufacturing process. Like
no, no, thank
hexane
you.
solvents and deodorants and overheating, and it's like blag,
Well,
right?
it's like the other day I was at the grocery store and I accidentally grabbed a block of margarine. It was wrapped in the foil just like butter instead of butter. And I brought it home. I'm like, what's wrong with this butter? It's like it's whipped or something. And I'm like, this is weird. This isn't right. And I checked the package and I realized it was margarine. My husband's like, oh, okay, well, we'll just finish it up. I'm like, no, that stuff
No.
is poison. And
Yeah,
he's like,
yeah,
he's like, oh, we're not gonna waste it. I'm like, no, put that in the garbage right now.
yeah.
I am not touching that is not in my house.
No, no. And I mean, I just shake my head because nowadays there's things like that are labeled vegan butter,
Oh, I know. And
and it's
I'm
like,
vegetarian and I've looked at some of these products and that's the danger. It's the same danger that Atkins has and all of their fake food and packages.
mhm,
Vegetarianism has the same problem
sure does.
because they have something called, and I've seen it, it's vegan butter, but you look at it and you're like, it's just chemical crap.
It's margarine.
Yeah, it's just not like,
Remarketing it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Um,
you help people on their journey. So what are the ways that you can help people if they're, finding themselves with a cancer diagnosis and, looking for alternatives to, just the traditional medicine or the standard medicine practices?
yeah. When I was diagnosed, one of the first things I did is I went looking for stories. I wanted to read people's stories. I wanted to find their stories. And I wanted to find people like me. I wanted stage 1 ovarian cancer, high grade serous carcinoma, middle age, postmenopausal. Like I was looking for that. And online tends to be a younger person's domain in a lot of ways, especially like, YouTube, my ovarian cancer story. It was always somebody in their 20s. Um, Not that that isn't important and it's tragic, but I mean, I was looking for something that I could relate to. So I started a blog. Once I started finding this information and realizing the power of nutrition and nobody knew about it, like I was kind of pissed off. Um, so I started a blog and a Facebook page to support the blog. And then I decided to write a book to really get it out there. So that's when I took some of the material from the blog and I outlined a book, and I had a few kind of mentors who were kind of helping me through the process. And I created Hacking Chemo, which is partly my story for people who want to find someone whose story they can identify with. But it's also about cancer metabolism and using nutritional interventions to stress the cancer, to strengthen your body and keep you in the best shape you can be in, but also to make it through chemotherapy with a minimum of side effects. And you can do that by being in ketosis and using fasting, periods of fasting during your chemotherapy treatments. I went through chemo, 6 rounds that were supposed to be pretty hardcore. And I actually had one of the drugs infused directly into my abdomen as opposed to taking it in through a vein. It was the best choice for that kind of chemotherapy. And I was of the I'm only doing this once sort of mentality. So, like, throw at me whatever you need to throw at me, like, we'll get through it. But because I fasted for 72 hours through each of my chemo treatments, I had almost no nausea. I never threw up. And other than the fasting periods, I never missed a meal. In fact, I never missed making a meal. I was never horizontal or wiped out. I had no mouth sores. I had no joint pains. I had no diarrhea. In fact, I got into constipation problems, but that's another story. And every treatment was easier than the one before in terms of not requiring as many additional medications to get through the side effect period. So I'd have maybe 4 to 5 days when I was just kind of low energy right around the chemo treatment. And then I'd be normal for 2.5 weeks. I mean, bald, but normal, My bone marrow was suppressed, which is a common chemo side effect because that's one of the few areas of an adult body that's actively in a growth phase all the time. It's producing your immune system and your blood components inside your bone marrow. But every cycle, it would bounce back well enough that like my levels would come up well enough that I didn't have to have any sort of additional drugs or anything to boost my immune system. And I was always able to take the next treatment on time. So I sailed through chemo, really. And that's not the usual experience at all. And there was a lot of research that I did to create what I called the chemo fasting protocol. It's evidence-based. It's not something that I just made up. And I used that 72-hour period every treatment. And like chemo didn't wipe me out. It was amazing. And that's why I wrote the book. I wanted to get that sort of stuff out there. That there are things that you can do that really are very impactful on your cancer journey. And they make you feel really powerful. Like they make you feel like you're really still in control of your own life and your own path and the journey that you're going to be on. You're not a victim of cancer, and you don't have to be in a war with it. Like there are things that you can do to support and love and nurture yourself and make yourself feel very powerful through the treatment.
Well, that's certainly a different look on, a different story than I've heard pretty much anywhere else on, making it through the journey of chemotherapy. Now, what is the best way for people to connect with you if they're looking to learn more about what you have to offer?
Sure. I have a website, and on the website it's just my name, marthatettenborn.com. On the website, there's links to my book, all the different places that you can get it. And there's also a page on how you can work with me if you want more involvement than the book, though the book has a lot of information. But I also, because I'm a registered health professional, because I'm a dietitian, I have a license that is only good in certain parts of the country and not in others, and doesn't work in the US, short of me actually like going and buying more licenses for other parts of the world. So I'm sort of approaching it less as a dietitian and more of as a cancer coach, or what I have really come to realize is my kind of handle is as a cancer doula. And a doula, I did the research. A doula is a person who helps and supports the person going through a process. It's not, so a doula doesn't do the medical process. In other words, a doula doesn't give birth. That's the midwife's job. The doula supports the mom. A death doula doesn't do medical care with someone who is in the palliative stage of life, but they support that person through that stage of life. So the doula can be someone who's a listener, who is supportive, who has knowledge, but they're there for the person, not the process itself. And by identifying as a doula, I hope that I can help more people with the journey.
Well, if you're listening and you're looking at connecting with Martha, I am going to have all of those links in the show notes. So be sure to connect with her. And Martha, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your story.
Oh, it's been lovely to have a chat, especially with another Canadian.
We got to stick together.
You betcha.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Roller Coaster Podcast. Want to chat or share your ideas about today's show? Pop me an email at hello@therollercoasterpodcast.com. Don't forget to connect with me on Facebook and Instagram at The Roller Coaster Podcast. Our theme song, Roller Coaster, was performed by The Lucky Setback. Audio editing by the one and only Jeff Quigley of Quigley Creative.
Life